Hey everybody, Dr. G here. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and body language expert, and today we're going to be analyzing even more from the Letecia Stauch trial. Now, normally, my videos have a big emphasis on body language, but today it's going to be much heavier on psychology, because today we're going to be examining the expert testimony of Dr. Dorothy Lewis. Dr. Lewis is a psychiatrist who's known for her work with DID, dissociative identity disorder, and her work with people who have killed. We're going to be analyzing and looking at all of the different things she talks about and says. I'm going to talk with you about my own interpretation of what she's talking about. This all gets very complicated. Now, before we get started, I wanted to tell you about a YouTube channel that I regularly frequent. This is not an advertisement, don't worry. But I do want you to know about Recovery Addict. Recovery Addict live streams trials just like this one. They've also covered Gwyneth Paltrow, Zachariah Anderson, Alex Murdoch, all sorts of interesting stuff. And if you want to be able to interact with people and watch these trials live, they have an amazing community of very smart, very interesting people. And every time I'm going to watch something live, that's exactly where I go. Sometimes I interact with people there too because I want to give my own thoughts live while the trial's going on. So I highly, highly, highly recommend that you check out Recovery Addict if you haven't yet. I know lots of people that watch my videos are already there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, let's go. So now we're going to talk about Dr. Lewis and her testimony. About the first 20 to 30 minutes are verifying and validating who she is, that she's got a documentary, she's written books, she's worked for many hospitals, has worked for universities, that she is well established in this community, and that she is a psychiatrist who's well qualified. Now, what we're going to start with are where some of the challenges are, because I don't want you to have to watch all of that. The first challenge is when the prosecutor starts talking about her license. Let's watch a minute of that.
Now, are you licensed to practice medicine in the state of Colorado?
No,
Are you licensed to practice psychiatry in the state of Colorado?
no,
Are you licensed to conduct forensic examinations on defendants charged with criminal cases in the state of Colorado?
I believe I'm recognized as an expert and permitted to do that, but I don't have a license in Colorado.
So this is a big problem. You cannot practice in a state without a license. She's going to talk some about reciprocity, and I'm going to explain what that means and why she's actually incorrect about that as well.
I've tried to maintain, for the most part, maintain licenses where there is reciprocity. And all these states where I have mentioned, I'm not licensed in each of them, but
So she's talking about different licenses being reciprocally recognized. Okay, so if you get reciprocity with a license, I know this is not the most interesting thing, guys, but you got to understand this is actually quite significant. For example, if I want to practice in a state like North Carolina and they accept reciprocity, I don't know that they do, that's just an example because it's a state near Georgia. If they accept reciprocity, that means I got to apply for a license there, they have to accept it, or I can apply for a temporary license or something like that, but I have to apply for a license to practice. For a psychiatrist to do evaluations, that is part of practicing psychiatry. You have to have a license. Reciprocity doesn't mean I have a license in New York and it's accepted everywhere. It means that you're allowed to then request it without having to take new tests.
I can reapply, and there is reciprocity usually.
So we're clear the answer to my question was no?
Well, the answer is I don't have a license here, no, but I've been permitted to testify.
You can testify. You could provide expert testimony if you're not doing an evaluation. You can provide testimony anywhere. You don't have to be licensed to provide testimony. You do have to be licensed to do an evaluation. And that's really where the challenge is right here.
I do not maintain a license because it would mean 50 licenses.
So if you were providing medical care and trying to help somebody with their problem, as opposed to just seeing what their problems were, that's when you need the medical license.
So the defense is suggesting that she only needs a medical license not to evaluate, but to provide medical care. An evaluation is providing medical care. As a psychologist, I can tell you, it's such a degree of providing medical care that in Georgia, you have to literally be a psychologist or an MD to be able to evaluate somebody. Even with a master's degree, you can't do it. That's how serious it actually is.
Well, I'm not sure it's restricted to that. I'm not individual who seems to have kind of split off from himself and not be there. It's very common for that other aspect of the person to take on the characteristics of the abuser.
All right, so she's talking about dissociation, and that sometimes when people dissociate, they take on characteristics of an abuser. This is where her and I are going to start having a lot of disagreements, because there are things that I know in terms of the way that I've practiced psychology and things that I know about psychology that strongly disagree with some of the things that she says. This is one of those things. To the best of my knowledge, typically when somebody has different identities, for lack of a better term, it's meant to protect them. They don't take on the qualities of their abuser and abuse people. It's quite literally the opposite of that. So I know she's very well respected in the community as far as DID goes, but her and I are going to have a lot of disagreements about this.
Which is, well, why also sometimes there are alters that have little groups that are aware of each other, and there can be another.
All right, now this is starting to sound a little outside of the realm of DID as I understand it. So she's talking about DID more in the sense of the way that Leticia has presented it and presents it, as you'll see once we get to that. DID, as I understand it, is slight shifts in perception. There's some amnesia qualities about it. There's a lot of confusion that comes around with this. It's not that you have groups of alters over here and ones over here that know things that others don't. Like that's a very, very odd way of characterizing DID. And to me, that one seems a little bit cartoonish.
That is not aware of, one group is not aware of the other, or the other person is not aware, or entity. When they are not in that homicidal, murderous, enraged entity, they are perfectly sweet, and in fact, they can talk about ethical issues. And
all right, so this is where I'm really starting to lose it, if I'm being honest with you. There's nothing she says up to this point that I could disagree with more. Truly, to suggest that serial killers have alters that commit killings and that they're otherwise just can be sweet, normal people, and that is how it happens, to me is completely absurd. I'm sorry, but that fundamentally is completely in direct opposition to everything that I understand and know about serial killers and manipulators and people with antisocial personality disorder. These folks are manipulative and calculated. They are not sweet and ethical and all of these things when they are not in a state of killing. To me, that is completely ludicrous. That takes away the abusive and manipulative qualities of people that do this. They are these people 24/7. They may act on violence at times and not on others, but they are not literally different people in their heads at these times. I think that is a wild mischaracterization of serial killers.
And be critical, and I think that it's probably one of the reasons that it's very hard to catch serial killers, because much of the time they're not in that state, and you'd never guess.
Because in that situation like that, if somebody does suffer from DID, they may present in a manner that they seem completely innocent because the memory of a horrible act is stored somewhere else. Would that be
Yes,
accurate?
it as far as they know, then they did not do it.
So she is neutralizing the awfulness of serial killers, suggesting that they have separate thoughts and experiences with this. We know that's not true. I mean, look at somebody I used as an example in a different video is BTK, where when he's very calm and very direct about things, he can talk about the murders that he committed in very specific and explicit ways. He has access to those memories. He wasn't a different person. He just hid it well. The idea that these are actual inaccessible memories and that makes serial killers capable of hiding, I cannot speak strongly enough about how much I dislike it being characterized in this way, because it is wrong.
Function as a teacher or whatever.
As you've probably noticed, but I haven't pointed out yet, Leticia Stauch is very interested in all of this testimony. She's paying attention for the first time in a while. Oftentimes she's sitting there with Kleenexes stuffed in her ears or something like that, or has her head down, her hair in her face. Now she's paying attention and wants to hear her talk about this.
Ever. And I believe that she was in a classroom, kids had left, and I think that a bookshelf fell down. As asked at different times, this is what came into her head and this is what she produced. But I don't think she knows for sure what happened.
Could that be confabulation?
I'm not even sure that Leticia believes this one.
Confabulation.
Confabulation is, I became aware of her seeming to move into her Maria persona. And
So the Maria persona that she's referring to is who she claimed did the violent acts. She claims that Maria is the one who killed Gannon of her alters or identities or whatever you want to call it.
her more aggressive, more, more scary persona, and clearly, if you follow the parts that I couldn't remember, they're confused. They make no sense. They are.
The thing that's so challenging about this is that it seems to be that when something is a lie that is absurd or ridiculous that we can all obviously tell is a lie, she just goes, well, that doesn't make sense. That's psychosis. All of her lies are explained away with, well, that's unreasonable psychotic behavior.
They are psychotic. They're incomprehensible by an ordinary. Included a particular central nervous system dysfunction that I could deal with. It's always fun for a doctor to be able to treat.
So she talked about doing an MRI or an EEG, but earlier in her testimony, she had basically said that they can't identify specifically where in the brain these things happen. So I really don't know what it is that she expected to find there. I still don't buy into the idea that an EEG or MRI really would have provided anything above and beyond what they already have.
What is your opinion?
Well, I think that she was that assuming that this area is about the time that Gannon was killed.
Yes.
She was psychotic at the time. She was not in touch with reality, and she did not. I don't think she knew the difference between right and wrong. I don't know whether she even knew what she was doing. I would guess,
And
yeah.
I've read your other reports. In your other reports, you define what insanity is in that particular state, and you explain in your report why you think someone was legally insane at the time based on the law. Why did you not do that in this case?
I would have to look at the definition.
So one thing to know is juries don't love it when people won't answer questions. You'd be better off answering a question directly, even if it didn't go in your favor, for lack of a better term, than working around questions. Juries do not love it when expert witnesses do this.
And I'm sure once I look at it, I can tell you why I did not use the exact words that perhaps are there. Of course, I wrote the report. I wrote, this is not a complete report. I wrote, Billy, and she said, yes. And I said, wait a minute. And because I was scared, I had not seen this before.
And Doctor, if I can just stop you there, just so I
Yeah.
can have the record be clear. So when you're referring to things that Billy said, you're using a male voice.
Yes, I'm imitating it as much as I can.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just want the record to reflect that. Go ahead, please continue.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at Leticia right now, her body language, this is a sign of extreme stress. I think this is where, before she may have felt a bit of confidence about the testimony and may have been feeling okay about it, this subject right here, as they're talking about Billy and this voice and all of these things, she's starting to feel a bit less confident. So she's starting to show more signs of stress.
I'm sometimes better at it but it was this harsh kind of thing. And I kept the door open, and I don't remember the man's name. I said, Mr. So-and-so.
See, you're seeing a lot more stuff like this too. She's touching her face, trying to feel calmer now biting her nails. Like she's starting to show signs of anxiety.
What about reports from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina? Did you review those?
I would have to look over this again, because again, I looked at these a while back.
One thing that the prosecutor does often is he brings up the different records that she's reviewed and asks her if she remembers these things. And unfortunately, for the testimony, she doesn't often recall a lot of the records she has reviewed. Now, as someone who has done thousands of these evaluations, you will get stacks of records like this tall, like literally. And the way that I would operate is I would summarize each record. I would type out my own summary of it, like it'd be a paragraph. Oftentimes they would be longer than the report itself because there'd be so many records you have to go through and you would have described. So when you talk about this, usually you can remember essentially the vast majority of the records you reviewed. You might not remember every single detail, but somebody could say, hey, do you remember this? You would essentially know what they were talking about. She doesn't seem to recall a lot of the specific records she's supposed to have reviewed and refers to just how many there are. And this, I think, becomes problematic as an expert witness or providing expert testimony. Because to form a really solid and convincing opinion, you need to know everything that's gone on, and you need to be able to get all the facts right and know what all the records essentially are, even if there's little details you need to be reminded of.
But I did bring them with me, so if you wanted me to look over what I have with me, I can tell you.
Well, tell me what you recall reviewing.
I would have to look at them. I don't recall the name of each place and each,
And you knew this was being videotaped, correct?
right?
Why couldn't they just watch the video?
In my experience, it is helpful for me to have the person who is responsible for the case to see what I see. Another reason would be, I've said to them, try not to interrupt me if you can avoid it, but if there is something toward the end or something that you feel I need to know that I've just failed to ask about, please feel free to ask it or ask me, can you ask it? So that there are a number of reasons why I like the person to see what I see and also to enable me to see what he or she sees that I may have missed.
All right, so there's a lot there to unpack. But basically, I've never, in my history working as a psychologist, have ever had an attorney sit in with a client while I am doing an evaluation. Maybe in some maybe in some places that's normal. It's certainly not something I've ever experienced, and I certainly wouldn't have them provide input midway through or point out things that they see that I don't.
And I had forgotten that yesterday.
Can you point me out where you found that information?
I'd have to look through all of this, but I can later if you like. I'll find it for you. It's just a note that I took because I thought it was interesting.
But what was it in an interview?
So this is an extremely consequential note to have had. If she has a note that suggests that she was known by Maria when she was younger, given that she's trying to prove DID, this is extremely important. So when you're in court, you can't just casually bring things like this up. I understand why the prosecutor wants information and wants it now.
I, as I say, rather than take up the time of the court and look through all of this, I will find it for you. But I just noticed it in the past maybe several hours or so, and I can find it for you because...
Well, here's the deal. I only have an X amount of time to talk to you.
Right, yes.
On January 26, 2020, the defendant had a video recording of her and Gannon talking about the fire. You recall seeing that?
No.
Think that would be important to look at? What she's saying the night before?
Once again, this would be part of the review of records. I do think it's problematic that she can't consistently remember all the different things that she would have needed to have viewed and reviewed to be able to come up with a comprehensive diagnosis.
Murder?
I would have lackey, if you want, you can call it psychotic, but that made no sense. This man was dead, I think, for 8 years. And to call in and say, she clearly was not thinking clearly or cogently or accurately.
And this is where a jury is, she's truly going to lose a jury, is that we all know that somebody can lie about a relative dying, and that doesn't mean that somebody's psychotic or wacky or whatever words she's using. Sometimes people just lie, and the fact that she won't even recognize that as a possibility impeaches her credibility to a jury.
And it was one of these ridiculous kinds of excuses that a person of her intellect would not be expected to volunteer.
And then the morning of the 27th at approximately 8:14 a.m. and then again at 8:16 a.m., she takes pictures of Gannon.
All right, there's Leticia showing stress again. She knows this is a really bad point for her, so this is something that she doesn't like hearing. And because she's been sitting up and trying to pay more attention today, she's actually showing a bit more body language.
Well, it certainly had that quality of, as I thought about it, whether there was an automatic quality to it, which is partly why I wanted certain neurologic.
An automatic quality to having stabbed somebody that many times. It's such a strange thing to say. I'm sorry, I'm reacting very strongly to this because it just feels so ridiculous. She stabbed him so many times because it was an automatic quality to the behavior. Like, so what we see with traumatic brain injury sometimes is something called perseveration. You see this in psychosis as well. So you ask somebody to like draw some dots on a page and they just can't stop doing it. They do it and they just keep going and going and going. So that's perseveration. That is something that we can see. We see sometimes repetitive motion or repetitive movements with brain dysfunction or certain types of illness. But the idea that that's why she stabbed him over and over again, that just doesn't make any sense. It's incoherent. It's offensively ridiculous for that to be the explanation for why he was stabbed so many times.
Test done because there was a repetition, as I recall, but there were signs on his hands of cut marks. So there
Fighting back, right?
looks that way to me.
Whoever did this had the capacity to form the intent to kill.
That's a stretch for me because when individuals keep doing this kind of act over and over and over again, it can be an attempt to kill, but it can also be a repetitious kind of automatic act.
So she just happened to be holding a knife, and it happened to be a repetitious act, and then she happened to shoot him. And it's so incomprehensible, I almost don't even know what to say about it.
And not having been there, and I don't know what with certain types of complex partial seizures occur, where a person just keeps, they may do something not at all violent. They may button and unbutton their coat. They may turn a light on and off and just keep doing it. And they may just keep doing that. Or they may say, not dead yet, I want to kill them. So that I don't know for sure.
The idea that, so psychotic, complex partial seizure, and dissociative identity disorder, those so far are all three of the reasons that she could have killed Gannon at this point.
That's in any of the language.
So she just said, Maria knows Spanish, but you don't. Having other identities doesn't mean you can magically learn another language and be able to speak it. Like, having multiple identities is not this Hollywood sort of version. So the idea that you would have different personalities that have different abilities to speak different languages is completely ridiculous. And to me, if I was in a room with somebody who was saying that, that would be cluing me in that, okay, I need to focus more on the possibility they are malingering, not that this is more evidence that they have all of these really dynamic and interesting personalities.
I know that my friend said she's taught Russian to her. Especially like they're gone for the summer. I just be on.
So as you can see, Leticia has completely basically given up at this point. She has no interest in engaging anymore. She is not interested in this. Like I said, I think that it can be embarrassing to watch herself do these kinds of things. So I imagine she's doing everything she can to tune this out. And the audio on these clips is atrocious. We really can't hear much of anything that's being said on these parts.
Bored. Yeah, like that was my life. I would rather tapping up all stuff, just taking everybody back on the team.
So now she is in one of the personalities that I think this one's Maria. The audio is so bad. She's supposed to have an accent and is talking about how she is trained to kill.
I'm trained to kill. That's what I do. But trained to kill. I'm trained to kill. That's what I do. Trained to kill. Okay? That's what I do. Kill for a living. Okay? Anyone that tries to hurt you, I'm trained to kill. Okay? That hurts anyone or no. That hurts the people that I care about. Okay? So you kill. I'm trained to kill. Yes. Yeah. Really.
The fist bump I find a little strange. It's one thing to build rapport with somebody, to make sure an evaluation doesn't get stuck. It's another to show that level of connection with somebody. And, you know, everybody's free to do as they please. There's nothing wrong with it per se, but that's not how I would do it.
And we'll do the talk about, would you are you guys game to talk about stuff and how you want to use the information that Maria is?
Sure.
Yeah.
So now she's talking to the attorney, which, as I referenced before, I think that's sort of problematic to do in the middle of an evaluation. There are a lot of questions she asks through this, and the audio is so poor it's hard for me to show examples of it, but there are many times where she will ask what she's experiencing or ask her if she's experiencing something. And to me, I would be afraid if I phrased things that way that it would lead Leticia to coming up with things in that moment. I would be concerned that the way I said it would be leading her to the how she's going to respond, which is literally the last thing we want.
Freeze it. Who's that person right there?
I don't recognize it.
That's not your son? You don't recognize your own son?
So this is a moment, a turning point for this witness, and I think that this is massively problematic.
Because he was running the camera, but I don't recognize.
Well, running the camera, Dr. Lewis, he's going out the door when the camera shuts off. What is your son doing in the interview room?
All right, so when you have patients, when you have someone that you're working with, you truly have to be able to keep their confidentiality. The idea of involving a family member is hugely problematic to me. I still don't understand her rationale for it, although she said he was operating the camera. That still seems very problematic to me from a variety of standpoints. Now this is, once again, going to be very difficult to hear and understand. I'm going to try to translate what I can, but there's some significant stuff here regarding body language. So watch Leticia throughout this and watch how different she's acting.
I, Maria, confess it's not English. Confesso pro para in conversano vetera desunt.
So basically there's a confession that, from what it sounds like they're claiming, is written in Latin. I can't hear it well enough to know whether it is or isn't. But the point is that the absurdity of it, once again, should be cluing her in that this is malingering, that this is not real. You do not have a bunch of different personalities, each one that speaks different languages, that she didn't know in the first place. The whole idea of it is it's silly.
What does it mean? I don't know. Well, what made you say it's a confession? Because I saw this presenters as an like a I, Maria.
So Leticia's very interested in her reading this. She's very energized by this. You see her with a lot more energy and motion than you do in a lot of other videos because she's having the opportunity to perform. She's got a performance. She has an audience. She has somebody that is interested in what she's saying and that she's doing. So you are going to see her more animated and more energetic. Although if you look at her down below during this trial, she is not wanting anything to do with this part of it at all. I believe that slumping down like this, that not wanting to look up, that I think that her confidence about how this has gone is not good at this point. I really don't think that she believes that this is going well.
Confesso, we don't know what she's confessing to. I know I just told you it says confession, but you take a lot of languages. like saying French, so okay. And we also sang the Requiem Mass and Requiem Mass, and it's like, I get body okay. So anybody here?
So, if I'm understanding right, that was a confession, which, as she talks about later on in this trial, apparently they lost, which seems very significant. It's hard to say whether or not Leticia's smiling at this point on the video. She appears to be. I mean, she really does seem to be pleased with herself because she seems to have a receptive audience to her performance.
Yeah, but listen. Did you think it's the devil?
So she's asking who she thought that Gannon was when she did these acts. I think that's what she's saying. This is very hard to hear, but that's the best I can gather. Which, once again, that is far too leading of a question. You can't be asking somebody, Did you think that this person was somebody else? That gives them ideas. You just want to have as much of a blank slate as possible for them to answer and tell you exactly what happened. You don't want to give them any ideas about what happened. You want them to tell you what happened.
You know it's there.
I know that he had this. I don't know who gave it to him. I've had many cases where children have excessive amounts of poisonous things in their food. But they're really different.
So now it sounds like she's implying that maybe Gannon just took it. I couldn't hear very well, but it sounded like she said there's plenty of cases where children ingest poisonous things. I could be misquoting, but that's what it sounded like. Which means that she's willing to defend Leticia's actions no matter what. At least that's what it sounds like. I'm not saying that's reality, but from a jury's perspective, they're going to see her as willing to make reality whatever it needs to be to make her not responsible for this.
Your Honor, those are my questions. Thanks. I have no further questions for this witness.
So hopefully this helps you better understand Dr. Lewis's testimony. Clearly her and I disagree on many things, and clearly she sees dissociative identity in a very different way than I do. Hopefully this helps you better get some clarity on Letecia Stauch's presence, how she presents, and what some of the challenges were. And in case you haven't, please don't forget to check out Recovery Addict. They really have an amazing live stream. High quality, great content, great community. You got to check out Recovery Addict. Last thing before we finish up, don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, thanks for watching.